Let me tell you something about humans, and I say this not with admiration, not with respect, and certainly not with anything resembling fondness. I say this because I, Vorakai of the Dominion, wrote the original threat assessment on species designation H7. I gave them a rating of 2.1 out of 10 on the Galactic Danger Index. I filed the report, I signed my name, I handed it to Fleet Admiral Zorvan personally, and I told him, with full professional confidence, "Sir, these creatures are not a priority. I would like to formally, on the record, apologize to no one, because what happened next was not my fault. It was everyone else's fault for listening to me." The year was, by Earth reckoning, 2031. The Dominion had been watching humans for roughly 40 of their solar cycles, long enough to form what we believed was an accurate picture, long enough to see them build primitive digital networks, long enough to watch them argue on those networks about whether a small reptile on a screen was cute or not. We watched them invent faster-than-light communication and then immediately use it to send each other images of food. Yes, food. They took one of the greatest scientific achievements in their species' history and turned it into a delivery mechanism for pictures of their meals. Our cultural analysts cried. Not metaphorically, actual biological moisture left their optical receptors. Commander Ferreira, who headed the observation team at the time, filed a supplemental report that read, and I quote directly, "Subject species appears to be intellectually capable, but spiritually chaotic. Recommend continued passive monitoring. No threat. Possibly pitiable." And so, we watched. We watched their wars, which were frequent, loud, and somehow always involved at least one nation that had no reason to be involved. We watched their politics, which defied every model of rational behavior our analysts possessed. We watched them invent medicines that could cure diseases, and then debate whether to use them, while continuing to eat substances that caused other diseases, which they also debated whether to cure. Analyst Drexa, third tier, young and idealistic, submitted a paper suggesting humans might be suffering from a collective cognitive disorder. Her supervisor, the seasoned Velamar, simply wrote back, "No, this is just how they are," and retired early, took a cabin on a moon somewhere quiet. Never filed another report. I understood Velamar completely. The plan, when it was finally approved, was called Operation Hollow Thunder, and before you judge the name, understand that Fleet Admiral Zorvan had a flair for drama that matched his complete absence of foresight. The concept was simple, beautiful even in its simplicity. The Dominion would make formal, terrifying first contact with humanity. Not gentle, not diplomatic. We would appear in their skies, over their most populated cities, with 17 warships each the size of their largest mountain ranges, and we would issue one ultimatum. Surrender your planet. You have 48 of your hours to comply. Resistance is inadvisable. That was it. That was the whole plan. Show up big, talk scary, watch them fold. It had worked on 4 other species. The Urathi collapsed their government within 6 hours. The Blunny actually sent us a formal letter of surrender with decorative borders. The Soul Queen race literally began praying to us, which was uncomfortable but legally useful. Humans, we assumed, would behave similarly. Commander Ferreira had a pool running among the fleet staff. Most bets were on total surrender within 20 hours. A few optimists said 12. Nobody, and I mean not a single officer across 17 warships, bet on anything other than surrender. Analyst Drexa, bless her strange little heart, quietly abstained from the pool. When asked why, she said, "I have a feeling." We laughed at her. We should not have laughed at her. The ships dropped out of transit at 6:14 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. On a Tuesday. Zorvan had specifically requested the timing be dramatic. Dawn, sunrise, long shadows over terrified cities. What he got was rush hour traffic. The first reports coming back to the command ship were confusing. Humans were, yes, stopping their vehicles. Yes, many were exiting said vehicles and looking upward. There was noise which our audio capture units processed and translated in real time. The noise was not screaming. A significant portion of it was, and I want to be precise here, people saying things like, "Oh wow" and "no way," and something that translated roughly to "brother, do you see this right now?" They were taking images, with their personal devices, while standing in the middle of their roads. Some were describing what they saw into those same devices, apparently recording for broadcast. One of our junior translators came over the communication line sounding genuinely baffled. "Sir," he said, A significant number of the humans appear to be excited. Zorvan tightened his grip on the command rail, broadcast the message. The message went out across every frequency the humans used. Every screen, every speaker, every signal. The voice was deep, it was layered, it was engineered by our best acoustic architects to trigger the specific frequencies associated with fear responses in carbon-based mammalian nervous systems. The ultimatum rolled across every continent, every city, every little farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. People of Earth, we are the Galactic Dominion. Your planet, your resources, and your allegiance are hereby claimed. You will surrender by this time, 48 hours from now, or face the full consequence of Dominion military authority. This is not a negotiation. This is not a warning. This is a declaration. We waited. Across 17 warships, thousands of crew members held their breath. The response came within 4 minutes. Not from a government, not from a military commander, not from any recognized authority structure. It came from a man named Bingo Torres. He was at the time sitting on the roof of an apartment building in a city called Manila, holding a beverage, and he had been recording the sky with his personal device since the ships appeared. He had approximately 11 million people watching his broadcast live. He looked into the camera. He looked up at the ships. He looked back at the camera, and he said, "Bro, no." The translators escalated it immediately. Zorvan reviewed the clip 17 times. He kept asking them what the subtext was. Was it defiance? Was it bravado? Was it a cultural formality before the surrender began? The translator, a veteran named Gisar, who had spent 30 years studying human behavior, just stared at Zorvan and said, very quietly, "Sir, that was the subtext. That was the whole thing." He just said no. From there it got worse. Within the hour, not governments but individual humans began responding publicly. One woman named Priya Sethi, a retired schoolteacher from a city called Pune, stood outside her home with a small sign that read, "We've survived worse, thanks." She was smiling. She waved at the ship directly above her city. A man named Ferris Okafor, some kind of entertainer based in a place called Lagos, posted a video saying that the ships looked impressive but that, and again I'm translating faithfully, "You all picked the wrong species on the wrong day. Also fix your tonal modulation. You sound like a movie villain." A group of young humans in a region called Queensland formed what they described as a neighborhood defense committee, and were photographed standing in front of their homes holding various gardening tools and looking directly up at our ships with expressions our analysts classified as aggressively unbothered. Drexa appeared at my station. She did not say "I told you so," but her face said it. Her entire being said it. Every molecule of her was saying it without technically saying it. "They're not afraid," I said. "No," she agreed. "They're angry. Getting there," she said. 41 hours into our 48-hour ultimatum, the humans held a global summit. Not to discuss surrender, not to debate compliance. They held it to coordinate. Every major government, along with several minor ones, several organizations that did not represent any government, and at least 3 groups that our analysts could not classify at all, joined a single communication session. We intercepted it, of course. We had been intercepting their communications for 40 years. The session opened with a representative named Kato Mwangi, who was apparently some kind of senior diplomatic official, and who opened the meeting by saying, "All right, everyone, I think we all agree on the first agenda item." There was unanimous agreement before he even said what the item was. The item was, in the official translated record, "We are not surrendering." That took 4 minutes to formally confirm, vote on, record and close. The next item on the agenda was titled, "What do we actually do?" That one took slightly longer. But here is what stopped my blood cold. Not the votes, not the speeches, not even the moment when a small nation in the Southern Hemisphere submitted a formal counter-declaration that included, I swear on my career, a list of grievances against us for rude presentation of ultimatums without prior introduction or diplomatic correspondence. What stopped me cold was a single exchange near the end of the session. A quiet voice, someone whose title translated roughly to Secretary of Defense, asked another official, a woman named Orin Vasquez, who led something called the Unified Space Initiative, a question. The question was, how long until our assets are in position? And Orin Vasquez looked at her screen, and she said, 39 hours. Silence on the call. Then someone else, slowly, said, that's cutting it close to their deadline. And Orin Vasquez looked up and said, good. I replayed that exchange for Zorvan. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "What assets?" And I said, "Sir, I think we need to revisit the threat assessment." And he said, "The 2.1 out of 10? And I said very quietly, "Yes, sir, that one." He turned to look at the main viewport. 17 warships. The greatest military force the Dominion had deployed in 60 years, hanging over a planet that had, in the last 41 hours, not shown a single sign of surrender, had organized globally with remarkable efficiency, and had apparently been quietly moving something into position for 39 hours. "What?" Zorvan said slowly. "Have they been building?" Nobody on the bridge answered, because nobody on the bridge knew, and that was perhaps the most terrifying thing any of us had ever experienced. Not the unknown weapon, not the coordinated response, not even Bingo Torres and his impossibly casual bro. No, it was the silence in that room. 17 warships, thousands of soldiers, every weapon the Dominion had at its disposal, and we were the ones who were scared. Let me describe for the historical record what the next 7 hours looked like aboard the Dominion command ship. Hour 1 was denial. Zorvan ordered a full sweep of known human weapons facilities. The results came back within minutes. Everything accounted for. Missile silos, naval fleets, ground-based artillery, their crude but functional orbital defense platforms, all of it catalogued, all of it tracked, all of it thoroughly documented in my original assessment under the header, militarily negligible. I stared at that phrase for a long time. Militarily negligible. I had written those 2 words. I had chosen them specifically because they sounded professional and final, the kind of words that made a report feel complete, closed, done. I was beginning to hate those 2 words with a personal intensity I had not previously thought myself capable of. Hour 2 was arguments. Zorvan wanted to know how the humans had anything moving into position that we had not detected. Our sensor chief, a meticulous and generally unflappable officer named Drool, pulled up every scan, every reading, every passive observation from the last 6 months of approach, and sat staring at it with the expression of someone who has just found a large insect in their food. "There is nothing here," Drool said. "Then what are they moving?" Zorvan asked. "There is nothing," Drool repeated, quieter this time, as if volume would make the answer change. Hour 3 was when Analyst Drexa, who had by this point earned the silent, grudging attention of everyone on the command deck, pulled up a secondary file she had apparently been compiling on her own time, without authorization, against standard protocol, and frankly, at this particular moment, nobody was in a position to complain about that. The file was titled, "Human Behavior Under External Threat Conditions, a Study in Escalating Irrationality." Zorvan looked at the title, then at Drexa, then back at the title. "Irrationality?" he said. "Their version of rational and our version of rational," Drexa said carefully, "are not the same document. Here is what Drexa had found, and I will present it as she presented it to us, because frankly her presentation was the only thing keeping some crew members from full existential collapse. Humans, when threatened by external forces, do not behave according to standard species threat response models. Every other species the Dominion had encountered followed a predictable arc: assess the threat, calculate survival probability, submit or resist based on that calculation. Clean, logical, manageable. Humans, Drexa explained, run a completely different program. When threatened, humans do not primarily calculate survival probability. They calculate something our language has no precise word for. The closest translation is something between personal offense taken and how much will this cost the other party. They become, in Drexa's clinical phrasing, motivated by spite in ways that override self-preservation instincts. She showed us historical examples. A small group of humans who, outnumbered by a factor of several hundred, chose to fight anyway, not because they expected to win, but because they had decided the other side needed to pay a price. Wars that logic said were over, continuing for years because one side simply refused to accept the conclusion. Individuals surviving conditions that should have been fatal, apparently through nothing more sophisticated than stubbornness. They have, Drexa said, pulling up one more piece of research, a saying, in multiple languages, across multiple cultures, in slightly different forms, but the same idea. The saying is approximately this: "If I am going down, I am taking you with me." Silence on the bridge. She let that breathe for a moment. Then she added, "They consider this a positive attitude." At hour 4 we received a formal communication, not from Kato Mwangi this time, not from any diplomat. It came from a woman named Admiral Ferreira, who introduced herself as the commanding officer of what the humans were now calling the Unified Earth Defense Coordinate, a title that had apparently been agreed upon, formed, staffed, and made operational within the last 30 hours. 30 hours! The Dominion took 11 years to form a new administrative division. Admiral Ferreira appeared on our main screen. She was a compact woman with a face that suggested she had not slept recently and had made peace with that fact. She wore a uniform that our analysts had never seen before, which meant it was new, created specifically for this. She sat at a desk with the flags of what appeared to be every nation on the planet arranged behind her, which was logistically impressive given how many flags that represented. She looked into the transmission with the calm of someone who has finished being frightened and moved on to the next phase. To the commanders of the Galactic Dominion fleet, she said, I am delivering this message on behalf of the unified governments, militaries and peoples of Earth. You have presented us with a 48-hour ultimatum. We have considered it thoroughly. Our response is as follows. She picked up a single piece of paper. She looked at it briefly. She set it back down. No, then she looked back up. Additionally, I have been asked to inform you that you have approximately 31 hours remaining on your own timeline, after which we will consider the matter entered into a new phase. I would recommend using that time to reconsider your position. Admiral Ferreira, Unified Earth Defense Coordinate. End transmission. The screen went dark. Nobody on the bridge moved. Then Drawl, Sensor Chief, professionally unflappable Drawl, said in a voice slightly higher than his normal register, Sir, I am now reading 17,000 separate heat signatures in low Earth orbit. Zorvan turned very slowly. You said there was nothing. There was nothing, Drawl said, and then there was 17,000 somethings. Where did they come from? Drawl stared at his screen. He stared at it for a long time. Then, with the tone of a man whose entire professional framework was gently breaking apart, he said, They were already there, sir. They were cold. No emissions. No power signatures. They were just waiting. Waiting for what? Someone asked. Drexa answered before Drawl could. For us to get close enough, she said. What followed was, and I write this in the official record without shame, a very fast senior staff meeting. The objects in orbit were not missiles. They were not conventional weapons platforms. When Drawl finally got full resolution scans on them, he described them as irregular in shape, modular in construction, and absolutely covered in what appeared to be improvised modifications. They built these themselves, Drawl said. Recently. Look at the construction seams. How recently? Zorvan asked. Based on the material cooling rates, Drawl said, and paused. Some of these were completed within the last 72 hours. Zorvan sat down. This was notable because Zorvan had not sat down during an active operation in his entire 30-year command career. They knew we were coming, he said. No, sir, Drexa said. They suspected something was coming, at some point, eventually, and so they built these and left them cold in orbit, and waited. For how long? Drexa pulled up a file. She read from it carefully. The first cold platforms were placed in orbit approximately 9 years ago. The bridge went very quiet. 9 years, Zorvan said. Yes, sir. They have been sitting in orbit for 9 years. Yes, sir. Just in case. That is the correct interpretation, sir. Zorvan looked at the viewport, the curve of Earth visible in the lower portion of the screen, blue and white and entirely too calm looking for what it apparently had been doing for 9 years. I want, he said slowly, a full reassessment of the threat rating. I was already typing. At hour 6, the humans did something that nobody on the command ship expected, and at this point we had collectively lowered our expectations to nearly the floor. They called us back. Not Admiral Ferreira, this time. This was Kato Mwangi, the diplomat. He appeared on screen looking well rested, which was either a good sign or a deeply unsettling one. He was holding a small cup of something hot, and he took a sip from it before he began speaking, which was, from a tactical communication standpoint, absolutely unhinged behavior. Good morning, he said, or whatever time it is for you. I want to have a conversation if that is acceptable. Zorvan stared at him. Your ultimatum deadline has not yet passed. Yes, I know, Mum, you said pleasantly. That is why I thought now was a good time to talk, before anything happens that neither of us can undo. Zorvan looked at me. I looked at Drexa. Drexa gave a very small nod that meant, roughly, keep listening. What do you want to discuss? Zorvan said. Mwangi set down his cup. His voice shifted, not to aggression, not to pleading, but to something level and clear. We are not going to surrender. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think you deserve honest information for your decision-making. We are not going to surrender, not because we are certain we can win, but because surrender is not something we do when we have other options, and we have other options. Your orbital platforms, Zorvan said. Among other things, Mongi said, and did not elaborate. Among other things, Zorvan repeated. I am not here to threaten you, Momangi continued. I am here because I believe someone in your fleet is capable of a different kind of thinking. Someone who looked at the last 47 hours and updated their understanding of what they were dealing with. He paused. Was I right? Zorvan said nothing. He was absolutely right. The conversation lasted 4 hours. I will summarize it because the full transcript runs to several thousand pages, and honestly some of it is still classified at levels I do not personally have access to, which is humbling. The short version is this. The Dominion had come to Earth expecting a species that would bend. What they found was a species that had apparently spent the last century quietly, methodically, and sometimes chaotically preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Not because they knew we were coming, but because they had looked at their own history of conflict and made a collective decision, not in any single meeting, not in any single policy, but as a kind of cultural understanding that if something came from the sky one day, they were not going to be unprepared. They had done it in pieces, individually, in hundreds of different programs run by dozens of different nations, many of whom did not talk to each other about it, many of whom did not even know the others were doing it. And yet somehow the result was 17,000 orbital platforms, a unified command structure assembled in 30 hours, and a diplomatic representative who drank hot beverages during first contact, like it was a morning meeting. Mungaig explained this to Zorvan, not boastfully, just factually. You expected panic, he said. Yes, Zorvan admitted. We panicked, Mwangi said. The first 2 hours, there was a considerable amount of panic, globally. I will not pretend otherwise. He picked up his cup again, and then people got angry, and when humans get angry, we get organized. Zorvan leaned forward. You are not angry now. No, Mangi said. Now we are past that. Now we are just waiting to see what you decide. What Zorvan decided, and what was ultimately approved by the Dominion High Command after a very long and reportedly very tense internal debate, was a full withdrawal. No formal treaty, no formal acknowledgement. The ship simply turned, and over the course of 14 hours, left Earth's solar system entirely. The official internal report classified Earth as non-viable for standard expansion protocol. Recommend indefinite reclassification. I wrote the new threat assessment myself. I gave humanity a 9.4 out of 10 on the Galactic Danger Index. The 0.6 I held back was professional stubbornness on my part, a small petty protest against the universe for making me wrong. Drexa reviewed my assessment and left one comment at the bottom. It said, should be higher. She was probably right. She was right about most things. I recommended her for a senior analyst position 3 weeks later. She declined it, transferred to the division studying human cultural development full-time, and published a paper 6 months after the event titled, Why Fear is the Wrong Model, Understanding a Species That Runs Toward the Problem. It became the most widely read intelligence document in Dominion history. There is a line near the end of it that I have read many times since. It says, the fundamental mistake was not tactical, it was conceptual. We assumed that because humans were smaller, newer and louder than us, they were lesser. We did not account for the possibility that all that noise they make, all that arguing and building and disagreeing and starting over, was not a sign of weakness. It was practice. Every conflict they survived, every impossible situation they came out of, every time they looked at something larger than themselves and said no, it made them better at the thing we came to test. We did not find a primitive species unprepared for the galaxy. We found a species that had been preparing for the galaxy the entire time, without knowing it, by simply being exactly what they are. I think about Bingo Torres sometimes, sitting on that rooftop in Manila, holding his beverage, looking up at 17 warships built to conquer worlds, looking back at the camera, bro, no. The entirety of human civilization, summarized in 2 words, at the exact moment it mattered most. I used to find that embarrassing for them. Now, if I am being completely honest, which is easier to do with a few years of distance between me and that bridge, I find it the most remarkable thing I have ever recorded in 30 years of intelligence work. Not the orbital platforms, not the unified command structure, Not even the calm way Admiral Ferreira delivered her one-word response while surrounded by the flags of every nation on the planet. It was the rooftop. It was the beverage. It was the absolute, settled, unimpressed certainty in that man's voice when he looked at the end of the world and decided, personally, that it was not going to happen today. That is what we missed in the threat assessment. Not the weapons, not the strategy, the certainty. We never found a species like that before, and according to the updated Galactic Registry, filed quietly 18 months after the withdrawal, we have now formally noted that Earth is to be approached, if ever again, only with full diplomatic preparation, significant advance notice, and under no circumstances, an ultimatum. The registry note was added by a senior clerk who had clearly read Drexa's paper. At the bottom, in small administrative text, it says, Species H7, reclassified. Handle with extreme caution and substantial respect. Do not under any circumstances make them angry on a Tuesday. Whoever that clerk was, they understood humanity better than I did after 40 years of watching. And they figured it out in one morning. That, honestly, is the most human thing about the whole story. Except for Bingo Torres. Nothing will ever be more human than Bingo Torres.